Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we are honored to have with us the highly talented and inspirational Vermont author of All Who Believed, Tamara Mathieu.
Hi.
How's it going?
Great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. And we can call you Tammy then.
Yeah, you can call me Tammy.
So it's great, Tammy, because I reached out. You're one of the rootstock authors of Rootstock Publishing. Really excited to been able to get your book, All Who Believed, a memoir of life in the 12 tribes. You're here. You're from Vermont. You
Yes.
are a 100% born and raised.
Technically, I was born in New Hampshire, but only because that was the nearest hospital. We lived in Hartford, Vermont, and I was born in West Lebanon, New Hampshire.
Okay.
So my birth certificate's New Hampshire, but I never lived in New Hampshire.
So I get, first and foremost, talk to us a little bit about kind of like your background and how you decided to publish this memoir.
Well, writing the memoir didn't start out like I didn't sit down like I'm going to write this memoir. When I left the 12 tribes, it was nice that there was already a lot of other people who had left. So it was easy to get on like a Facebook group, with other ex-members, things like that. And, we would tell our different stories to each other. Somebody would put up a post and then I would say, oh my gosh, like I remember that person and I had this experience and so I just started writing out different stories and it was kind of therapeutic. I would just recall a situation and I would write it down. And before I knew it, I had, just pages of, just the paragraph about this situation and then one of my best friends, who's actually a big part of my story, Michelle Spalding, she published a memoir about her childhood growing up in Swanton, Vermont. It's called Bliss in an Isle of Organized Soup Cans. And it is just a really great, fun memoir. And just reading it, I thought, I think this is something I could do. I already have a pretty good start. So then that's when it came to me, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could write a memoir. And I had a lot of people reaching out to me, especially those first few years after I left, families that still had relatives in the community, asking me like, what's your advice? We want them to leave, but how do we talk to them? Or, I've had, lots of other ex-members writing me, asking about my experience. My own family, I just don't really think that a lot of people in my family really understood the vastness of what we had done and what we had gone through and how terrifying it was to leave. So I thought it would just be nice to have this resource, to explain my story, to really show why we chose to do what we did and what my everyday life was like, and then why we left and how that came about. And it was really important to me. I didn't want to sensationalize things. I wasn't trying to just put out this like shocker, type of thing. I wanted it to be like just really realistic because I've read a lot of articles and different things that have come out about the 12 tribes over the years and different news stories that have come out, and they've all just kind of had that like sensationalized feel to them. And then that can be easy for people to dismiss, and not really take seriously. And I didn't want my memoir to be like that. I wanted it to be real and relatable. And so I just started to organize my stories, put them in chronological order, and add on to them, put more details in. And there came a point that I just felt like it was writing itself. I would just sit down at my computer and before I knew it, like an hour had gone by and I would have just been writing and writing and writing and writing. It was really healing to just be able to get everything down. Every now and then I'd show a story to my husband and say, will you read this? Like, am I remembering this right? do you remember this the same, the same way that I am? Or once I felt like I was finished, I did try to send it to a couple different publishers, and I didn't get any acceptance, so it was kind of discouraging. I kind of sat on it for probably a couple more years. Every now and then I'd go back to it, go through it again, try to tighten up the story, edit it. And then at one point, there's an author, his name is Bill Schubart, and he did a little seminar at the Swanton Library about how do you publish a book? And
Mm.
I saw that and I went to it, and he mentioned rootstock publishing. And so I sent them my manuscript, within a few days of that, and they accepted it. So
Just do a quick recap. I know it's a large thing, but for our listeners out there who might need to be reminded of what the 12 tribes is.
yeah, so the 12 Tribes is it's a fundamentalist Christian organization, I feel, is like the most accurate way to describe it, even though they don't identify as being part of Christianity. But it's Bible based. It started back in the 70s with a couple, Eugene and Marcia Spriggs. They opened their homes to young adults in their area, who were Christians, and they'd have Bible studies. And they were going to a church at that time, and they had a Bible study one night that was canceled because of a Super Bowl party. And they felt like the Super Bowl is not something of God, like that's a worldly endeavor, and why would Bible study be canceled for something like that? So they decided to break off from that and start their own church. And at that time they called it the Vine Christian Community.
Mm.
And more and more, they would just have these. This was the 70s, so I think that was a time when people were drawn to, community and hearing messages of hope and love. And so they would gather at parks in Chattanooga, and have what they called critical mass, and different people would share, and it would draw people. They'd have these huge groups of people that would want to talk about Jesus and the Bible and the way we're supposed to live. And I think it just kind of happened organically in the beginning. Um, so Gene and Marcia opened up their home. Different people came to live with them. They decided to start, to open up a deli where they could all work together. And then they started receiving a little bit of persecution, I think, from the area churches. I did speak with one ex-member who was part of that community back then, and he gave me a lot of interesting details of what actually went down. Like, I only heard the stories that were passed on, to us as members of the group. And somehow they had an outreach that maybe people knew family members up in northern Vermont in the Island Pond area. They ended up connecting with a couple of families in Island Pond who had farms, and they wanted to be part of this cause. And so the group left Tennessee, moved up to northern Vermont, and then Island Pond, was kind of the main headquarters at that time, where everything branched out from there. Like, within the next several years, they started sending out groups of people. They sent people to Europe and down to South America, and they were just looking for people that were willing to give up everything for this cause, give up their house. And and that's how it spread. And now it's, they're a worldwide organization. They're in Europe and Australia and Japan and Brazil and Argentina and, lots of places in the United States, Canada. And their numbers aren't huge. It's not like hundreds of thousands of people are part of the 12 tribes. Like, some communities might only have 10 to 20 people living there. So I think the biggest numbers that we saw when we were there was maybe around 5,000. And, since we've left, lots and lots and lots of people have left. So I can't really speak to what their numbers are now, but they're definitely still a very active group. They just opened a new deli in Island Pond, Vermont. They just opened a new deli out in Hamburg, New York. So they're still out there and active, and probably obviously recruiting new members.
Anybody that's from there in Vermont might also recall the Island Pond raid that
Yes.
happened
Yep.
back in '84 as well.
Yep. So,
Yeah.
yeah, back in 1984, there were allegations of child abuse, and there was a raid, and children were like literally taken from their beds. And it was deemed unconstitutional the way the whole thing went down. And of course, the community saw that as like God delivered them. It was like with Moses, like parting the Red Sea. Like they really spoke really highly of the judge. His name was Judge Mahady at the time, who deemed it as unconstitutional. All the children were returned, probably somewhat traumatized from that whole experience. And then, a very similar thing happened in 2013 over in Germany, where somebody moved in pretending to be wanting to become a member, but was actually like an undercover reporter, and set up cameras and, got footage of children being spanked. And so their children were taken in a very similar fashion, but some of them still haven't been returned. Some of the parents had to flee to other countries. That was like a year before, or less than a year before we left the community. It was a big deal. And but what goes around when stuff like that happens, I remember being told, we're all going to be tested. We're all going to be tested like those parents in Germany. We're all going to have to, prove to our Father, like, what's more important, like basically saying that it's like the parents that stayed and were faithful, they were the ones, to admire. And, but any of the parents who left, left because their children were gone. That wasn't the example to follow. I just remember thinking, if anybody ever comes here and takes my children, like I wouldn't stay here like another second.
Right.
I just couldn't imagine like having to go through a testing like that. It was like a terrifying thought.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Can you talk to us a little bit about, after leaving the 12 tribes, what were some of the hardest adjustments you had to make?
Just being in charge of your day-to-day life. For 14 years, I had just, other people made the schedule. Like, it wasn't like I never had any kind of decision making. I did, there's a kitchen covering, a woman who makes the menu and does all the planning. And I had that job for a long time. But it's just the life there is so regimented and routine. You don't have a lot of opportunity for any like independent action. Like, that's frowned upon. You don't do independent things. You're not looking to do your own will. And the standards of child training and discipline are very black and white, very clear, very strict. So to come out, and then I knew that I didn't want to continue on in the way we'd been disciplining our children. So then it's like, what do you do? What do I do when my 6-year-old's having a tantrum? Put him in timeout? Like, I don't even know. It was like being a brand new parent with children ages 15, 13, 9, and 6, who had only known this very strict, controlled, regimented environment. It was very challenging, very difficult. I probably cried every day for like the first 6 months, just not knowing, even the beginning from one day to the next is so uncertain. We didn't know where my husband was going to find a job, where we were going to live, the children were going to start school. And, it was during those first few weeks that I remember realizing like this is how people could end up going back, because like at least there, I knew what we were going to be doing that day. I knew we were going to, my children were going to, you know, be doing productive things and not just driving around in a vehicle, like trying, to have my husband apply to places or see if there's any apartments for rent. Just this state of, it felt so unstable. And I could just see how the familiarity, could bring people back if they don't have the resources to get through those initial few months, because it is so scary. I put my two younger ones in public school, and that was like so hard. It was so hard. I homeschooled my two older ones. They did not want to go to school. They were terrified. They didn't know anybody. And I grew up here, so I did have like some friends and things like that. And they were very supportive, very helpful. But it's hard for people that haven't gone through that and come out of it to know, so like I got a lot of understanding just connecting with other people that I'd known who had left as well, and were able to tell me, everything you're feeling is normal. You're not crazy. Like the guilt you feel and the fear, like, okay, am I going to be struck by lightning? Because it's really put in you that you leave the community, you're leaving the place of our Father's protection, and you're going out into the world where there's every evil spirit. Your children are no longer protected. You're not safe. So I lived in fear for quite a while that some horrible thing was going to happen, and that I'd have to live with that. Like, it's because we left. If we'd never left, this never would have happened. This is God's judgment on me. I was kind of afraid for a long time to like really let myself feel happy. I thought, okay, if I do that, then it's all gonna come crashing down. Like I had to kind of live in this precarious place of, still kind of thinking, well, if this happens and this happens, then if somehow it's proven to me that that's true, then we'll go back. It's like all these mind games you're playing with yourself to justify and not feel guilt, and like you've just, thrown your children to the wolves.
How has your perspective on faith and spirituality changed since leaving the 12 tribes?
I feel like I'm still a spiritual person. I feel like I never lost that belief in the possibility of a higher power or, something more than us. I strongly believe in karma. I strongly believe in like the frequency at which we vibrate, and like thinking positive and being grateful causes you to vibrate at a higher frequency, and it helps your, it helps your mental well-being to be a positive person. When I started homeschooling after we left, the only homeschool groups that I could find were Christian related. And I wanted there to be a social network for my children. I mean, they had grown up living in a house of sometimes with like 40 to 60 other people. And suddenly it's just our family. That was like a huge, huge change. And I knew that they, felt like it's normal that they would have relationships and a social life and make friends. And I wanted all that for them. So one of the only groups I found was at this church in St. Albans. And so I got in touch with them, and they invited us over. And once Emmett saw that it was a church, he wouldn't even get out of the car. He was just like, nope, not going in there, not going in that church. And I just remember being like, Emmett, like, let's just give it a try. Like, we've got to meet people. We can't just be secluded, in our house. And my daughter, May, was willing to go in with me. Emmett never did. He stayed in the car the whole time. So May and I went in, and everyone seemed friendly. And they started talking to me about, they gathered every Friday. They had like a Friday school where we all would get together, and they said that each Friday morning started out with a devotional, and that the different parents would take turns, like having a scripture or like something to read. And that just, I couldn't sign up for that. could not imagine trying to open a Bible and pick a passage and talk about it. It just brought back that part of my life from the 12 tribes that I wasn't missing at all. And I
Right.
knew that my children were not going to really appreciate that. So I've never been able to go back into the Bible, that aspect of spirituality. I've not been drawn to try to find a church or anything like that. I feel like I just enjoy my belief in a higher power. I don't really haven't felt the need, for more since we've
Right.
left.
And so, what do you hope readers will take away from your memoir, especially those that might be in similar situations?
Yeah, I would hope that people would really not take their individuality and their autonomy and their power to make decisions in their own lives for granted at all. Like, I didn't really realize what that was going to be like when we made that decision. I just thought it just seemed like such a wonderful, wholesome, family oriented, you know, lifestyle that was just going to be wonderful, like just filled with friends and busy and farming and gardening and just, but I didn't really realize how much control, other people would have over every single aspect of our life, and how our free thinking and our creativity and all that would really be squashed. And it's one thing to choose it for yourself, and then when you see it happening to your children, and that realizing, that they don't really have any choices for their lives. I can remember Emmett talking about, you know, he would have loved to like be a pilot, or my daughter like, oh yeah, maybe I want to be a vet. And you couldn't you couldn't like fan the flames of those aspirations in your children. You had to be like, well, no, that's probably not our Father's will for your life. Your life is, your purpose of your life is to, be a disciple and come when you're called and go where you're sent. And for girls, that meant growing up and getting married and having children that were going to grow up and fulfill the vision of the 12 tribes, which was to eventually bring about the end of the age and the return of Jesus. And like, that's what they were living for, that one day um, they were going to raise up 144,000 male virgins that were going to go out into the world and preach the gospel in a time when the world is so evil that they were all going to be slain, like murdered in the streets. And like when the last one dies, that's when Jesus, who they refer to as Yeshua, would return. And so it was like, that's just supposed to be the only goal, like no personal aspiration. It was
Mm.
just supposed to be like, what is God's will for me? And the leaders or parents or whoever, would tell the children, what God's will for them was. And they were just expected to submit to that and be content.
How much of this was therapy for you to write this, and how much of this is of wanting to let people know what your experience was like?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of both of that.
Yeah.
Because I got a lot of questions. And the most common questions were, why did you join? What was it like there? And why did you leave? So that's what I was hoping to encompass in my book. And the outreach is obviously going to mostly be for people who left or who might be considering joining, or just anybody who's curious. But, the people that are there right now, like, they're not really going to have access to my book. We didn't, reading was one of those taboo things. We weren't supposed to read any outside literature. So it's not like my book can really be like an outreach for people that are still in there, still in that group.
Talk about you said you started writing this out, and it's a big book too. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this isn't anything to sniff at. It's over 250 pages.
Mm-hmm.
So, was there anything from that process that you put together that you kind of had to edit out, like your editor say, this is good, Tammy, but it doesn't kind of fit within the direction of the book? Or is there anything that didn't make the final cut?
No, there wasn't. I was
Really?
surprised
Okay.
by that. Like I thought that it was going to be like that with the editing process. I thought there'd be more input about that, and that there wasn't. And I cut out a few chapters myself. I probably ended up cutting out at least two, maybe three chapters that I kind of felt didn't really, you know, add, too much more to the story. And I knew that it was getting really lengthy, but it's hard to sum up 14 years, in one book. So I really tried to stick with the main stories that I felt gave like a nice continuous flow of the years that were passing by, and really highlighted like every aspect that I thought affected me the most and was like the most important parts that I wanted readers to learn about.
And yeah, and so basically it was like from 2000 to 2014.
Yes.
Was that the time period?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you working now then on any new projects or books?
Well, I kind of have the thought, maybe because I've had a lot of people say, it'd be so interesting to continue your story. And, because I kind of ended it when we left.
Hmm.
I didn't go into a lot of details of the afterwards. So people are interested in that, and, what it was like how did we reestablish ourselves in the world at that time. And, we still had relatives in the community. My maternal grandmother came and lived with us when my youngest was a baby. My in-laws came and lived with us 3 years after we had joined. So I still had family there for a long time. My grandmother stayed there until she passed away in 2019. And I never would have wanted to have jeopardized our ability to still communicate and connect, because it's really looked down upon for people there to have any communication with people who have left, even like parents whose children have left. There's restrictions, and we told my grandmother we would always take care of her. If she decided she wanted to come live with us, we'd go get her at the drop of a hat. And I feel like the community really realized that if they had imposed that on my grandmother and told her that she was no longer allowed to see us, I really don't think that she would have stayed there. But they made an exception for her. We went and visited her. She'd come up and spend a few days at a time up here with me and my family. She was almost 80 years old. I don't really think they felt like so much that was a threat to anybody. But when we left, like a year or so after we left, my younger daughter wanted to go to the community and stay with my in-laws who hadn't yet left. And they were told no. They were told no, that their 10-year-old granddaughter could not come and stay with them, that they had never, completely given up their independence and their sovereignty enough, because my father-in-law was, still maintained a lot of freedoms that weren't really looked well upon while he was there. And that was the line in the sand for them. Once they were told they couldn't see their granddaughter, they left as well. They came up here, they lived with us for several months while they were trying to reestablish themselves, in their 60s. And now they just live a couple miles down the road from us.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so yeah, our story has a lot of different tangents.
But that's a great point though, Tammy, is to get a sequel to that about just like the reintegration piece of it. There definitely is a part two to this then.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Any final thoughts, Tammy?
Well, I'm just happy to have this chance to be on this program, and I just really appreciate any chance I have to discuss the book, answer questions.
And if people want to learn more about you and the book, where's the best place they could go to?
I do have an author page on Facebook. I've actually had some people reach out to where on the back of my book it tells where I work, and I've had two people reach out to where I work because they wanted to get in touch with me for various reasons about experiences that they had with relatives or in the community. So And I'm more than happy to chat with people, personally as well.
Tamara Mathieu, author,
Mm-hmm.
is, and as we mentioned, the book is out as of this recording, and it came out. It came out in May 2024.
Yes, just a
Yep.
little over 2 months ago.
Well, thank you so much, Tamara. It was a pleasure chatting with you, and you're gonna have to come back on when your sequel book comes out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, thank you.